Tonight, we invite you on a slow and gentle journey through fields of golden grain, the quiet rhythm of a millstone, the warmth of rising dough, and the comforting glow of a medieval hearth. In this long-form video, we'll explore the daily life of a village baker in medieval Bavaria, not through drama or great events, but through the peaceful cadence of everyday rituals. This is a story of flour, fire, and hands that know the rhythm of bread. Allow yourself to settle in. Let the pace slow. Let the world soften. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to subscribe and like the video, but only if you enjoy what I do here. And write in the comments from where you are and what time it is. Now turn off the lights and fan for the soft background hum. And let's get into the night journey together. In the gentle light of a Bavarian morning, we begin our journey not in the kitchen or at the hearth, but at the source of sustenance, the mill. Nestled near the bank of a slow-moving stream, the village mill sits comfortably beneath the arching branches of beech and alder trees. The dew still clings to their leaves, and the air is tinged with the scent of damp earth and grain. Jacob, the miller, rises early. He moves with deliberate quiet, his thick woolen tunic brushing against the sacks of wheat that line the walls of the milling room. The floor is covered in a thin film of flour, soft as mist. Jacob's hands are weathered, but capable. They lift a burlap sack and untie the rough string at the top. The grain pours into the hopper with a rustling sound, like dry leaves in autumn. Gravity guides it downward, where two great stones, millstones carved from local granite, wait patiently. The upper stone, or runner, turns slowly over the bedstone, crushing the wheat kernels into a fine, pale dust. The turning is powered by a wooden wheel turned by the steady push of the stream beyond the mill. Jacob listens. He knows the sound of the stones better than any voice. A rhythmic grinding, not too fast, never sharp. It's a meditative sound, one that fills the space like a chant. The stream outside murmurs in approval. He checks the flour as it emerges from the stones. The texture must be right, not too coarse, not too fine. He cups some in his hand, letting it sift through his fingers. It is good. Warm, even. As the friction from the stones heats the flour ever so slightly, it releases a gentle, nutty aroma. Jacob takes a wooden scoop and fills the first of many sacks. He works slowly. There is no rush. The village will need this flour today, tomorrow, and every day after. He feels no urgency, only rhythm. The walls of the mill are decorated not with tapestries or paint, but with time. Marks etched from years of sacks brushing by, small nicks in the beams from careless tools. Even the cobwebs in the corners are soft and undisturbed, as if the spiders, too, understand the sanctity of quiet work. Outside, the cart waits. Two oxen chew cud lazily as the morning mist begins to lift. Jacob loads the sacks, one by one, his breath steady and calm. The cart creaks gently as the wheels accept their weight. Flour dust floats in the air like early snow. He places a hand on the side of the cart, giving it a reassuring pat, then turns to pour himself a small cup of spring water. It's cold, fresh from the earth, and he drinks it slowly. Behind him, the wheel continues to turn, the stones grind on. This is not just milling. This is the heartbeat of a village. Every loaf of bread, every pastry, every thickened stew begins here. And Jacob knows that. It is why he greets each sack of grain not as a chore, but as a quiet companion in the cycle of life. The oxen begin their gentle walk down the path, toward the bakeries and kitchens that await. Their hooves thud softly on the packed dirt road. Jacob walks alongside them for a while before stopping at the old wooden fence, where he rests his arms and watches the trees sway. The sun begins to break fully through the clouds now, casting long, amber-colored shadows across the grass. The morning is no longer new, but it is still tender. In the mill, the stones continue their work, alone now, yet untroubled. They will rest when the flour is finished. And so the flour moves forward, carried gently toward its next chapter, the hands of the baker and the warm embrace of the hearth. The flour arrives not in haste, but in harmony. It comes by cart, wrapped in burlap sacks, each resting gently against the other like companions on a long, quiet journey. The path it takes is well worn, packed by centuries of footfall and hoof prints, traced by wheels carrying grain to mill and flour back again. Anna, the village baker, is already awake. She has been for some time. Sleep, for her, ends before the sun stirs. But this is not a burden. It is the rhythm of her life, like the heartbeat of the dough she tends. Her home is modest, but warm. It leans slightly, like many old cottages do. Timbers bowed gently from years of weather and time, yet strong and welcoming. Smoke curls from the chimney in a thread-like spiral, barely noticeable in the morning light. Inside, the hearth is the heart of everything. It is not merely a place for fire, but for life itself. Meals are cooked here, warmth is shared, stories are told in its flickering glow. And for Anna, it is where the dough rises, where bread becomes more than sustenance. It becomes memory, comfort, and offering. She unties the sacks of flour with care. One might imagine that, after so many years, her fingers would move with thoughtless speed. But Anna is slow by choice. Every motion is intentional. She honors the process. The flour is scooped into a wide wooden bowl, one carved by her grandfather, whose initials are still faintly visible on the bottom, now worn smooth by time and touch. The bowl sits at the center of her large, oaken table, whose surface bears faint cuts and nicks from generations past. A dusting of flour coats it gently now, catching light like frost on a window pane. Next, she takes water from the ceramic pitcher by the hearth. It was gathered from the village well just after dawn. The water is cool, slightly metallic with the taste of the stone basin, but fresh and clear. She pours it in slow, concentric circles over the flour, watching it disappear gradually, like dry earth drinking rainfall. Then, a pinch of salt, harvested in cakes from distant salt pans, then broken and sold at market. She crumbles it carefully between her fingers, feeling the grains dissolve slightly on her fingertips. The salt gives structure, balance, a quiet companion to the flour's warmth and the water's softness. Next comes the yeast. Not the dry kind one might find in modern kitchens, but a living leavening, a sourdough starter that has lived on in her household for years. It rests in a small clay jar, its lid tied with cloth. Each morning, she feeds it, and in return, it rewards her with life. She scoops a portion with a wooden spoon, folding it gently into the flour and water. The sour aroma is unmistakable, slightly sweet, slightly sharp, like apples gone soft in the sun. Now comes the mixing. At first, Anna uses the spoon. The dough is wet, heavy, resistant. It clings to the wood, stubborn and shapeless. But soon, she places the spoon aside and uses her hands. The dough yields beneath her touch, like cool clay warming to her palms. She does not rush. She never does. Her hands move in a steady rhythm, folding, pressing, turning, over and over, like breath. The dough sticks at first. Flour dust rises like smoke in the morning light. It gathers in the creases of her fingers, along her knuckles. But she pays it no mind. Outside the window, chickens peck in the dirt. A cat stretches on the sill. Somewhere, a bell tolls the passing of another hour. Inside, the room remains still. The kneading continues. 10 minutes, then 20. With each repetition, the dough becomes smoother, silkier. It stretches without tearing, gathering strength. The gluten, though Anna wouldn't have known it by that name, forms invisible threads beneath her hands, like a net holding the ingredients together. She feels for it, not with science, but with intuition, with memory. She knows when the dough is ready. It tells her, not with words, but with feel, with weight, with the way it resists then yields. And so she continues. There is something sacred in this moment. The world narrows to the dough, the table, the sound of her hands against wood. It is meditation, labor, and love, all wrapped together in one slow, deliberate act. When the dough is finally supple, she shapes it into a gentle ball and places it into a clean bowl, one dusted lightly with flour. She covers it with a linen cloth, worn soft by years of washing and folding. The cloth falls gently over the bowl like a veil. She places it near the hearth, not too close to the flame, but close enough to feel the warmth. The dough will rest here, wrapped in silence, as the fire speaks in soft pops and low whispers. Anna wipes her hands, rinses them in a ceramic basin. The water is cool, refreshing. She pats them dry with a towel, then pours herself a cup of herbal tea, just dried chamomile and mint, steeped in water from the same kettle that warms by the hearth. She sits for a while, not out of fatigue, but reverence. The dough needs time to rise. And so, too, does the baker need time to reflect. She watches the play of light on the floorboards. The sun has risen higher now, casting thin rays through the shuttered windows. In the background, The dough begins its quiet transformation. Inside the bowl, bubbles form slowly. Gases build as the yeast consumes the sugars within the flour. It grows, imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably, pushing against the linen cloth like a child reaching for the sun. Anna watches without watching. She has done this too many times to need constant supervision. Her mind drifts, not far, just enough to feel the day unfold around her. She remembers mornings from years past of her mother's hands shaping dough at this same table, of laughter shared over warm loaves, of silent tears cried into a bowl when the world outside grew heavy. The dough carries those memories now. It is not just food. It is family, history, love translated through flour and fire. After some time, an hour, perhaps two, she lifts the cloth and smiles. The dough has doubled in size, its surface puffy and domed like a pillow. She presses a single fingertip into its side and watches as the indentation slowly fades. It is ready. Inside the bowl, bubbles form slowly. Gases build as the yeast consumes the sugars within the flour. It grows, imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably, pushing against the linen cloth like a child reaching for the sun. Anna watches without watching. She has done this too many times to need constant supervision. Her mind drifts, not far, just enough to feel the day unfold around her. She remembers mornings from years past of her mother's hands shaping dough at this same table, of laughter shared over warm loaves, of silent tears cried into a bowl when the world outside grew heavy. The dough carries those memories now. It is not just food. It is family, history, love translated through flour and fire. After some time, an hour, perhaps two, she lifts the cloth and smiles. The dough has doubled in size, its surface puffy and domed like a pillow. She presses a single fingertip into its side and watches as the indentation slowly fades. It is ready. With care, she turns the dough out onto the flour table. It lands with a gentle sigh, deflating slightly but still vibrant and alive. She presses it down, shaping it once again. The air escapes in soft bubbles. She folds it once, twice, building strength once more before the final rise. This stage is called shaping. Anna does not form loaves with uniform precision. Instead, she lets her hands guide her. Some loaves are round, others oval. Sometimes she braids a few for market days or special meals. But today, she keeps it simple, 2 round bowls, each the size of a small melon. She sets them onto wooden boards, dusted with coarse flour to keep them from sticking. Then, with a small blade sharp and narrow, she scores the tops of the loaves. Each cut is deliberate, elegant. A single slash across the top, then a crosshatch on the other. These cuts are not only for beauty, they allow the bread to expand in the oven, to bloom rather than crack. She pauses for a moment, admiring the symmetry. Then, once more, she covers them with linen. They will rest again, rising a second time. This is the final proofing. A last, quiet breath before the heat of the oven transforms them forever. Anna rises and begins to prepare the fire for baking. The bread is never eaten alone. Even when one dines in solitude, there is company in the wood grain of the table, in the quiet creak of the house settling, in the memory of those who shaped the meal. It is nearly midday now. The sun filters through the windows, cutting golden shapes into the room's corners. Anna prepares the table slowly, not out of luxury, but out of reverence. This is the moment where the labor of hours, of hands, of flame, becomes nourishment. She clears a space on the large oak board that serves as her table. It bears the marks of many meals, a burn mark from a candle toppled years ago, a child's shallow carving of a tree, long grown smooth beneath scrubbing cloth and elbow. She brushes away the last of the flour dust with her apron and sets out a few simple bowls. One contains lentils simmered gently over the hearth, flecked with a bit of onion and wild herbs. Another holds turnips and carrots, roasted until sweet and caramel-colored. There is a dish of soft cheese, white and spreadable, made with milk from the neighbor's goats. And finally, a jar of apple preserve, deep amber, slow-cooked during the last harvest and rationed out with care. But at the center of the table always is the bread. She places the loaf on a wooden trencher, still warm at the base. Its crust glows in the filtered light, mottled and crisp. A linen cloth half wraps it to keep the heat close. The smell, even now, rises like incense, earthy, sweet, edged with fire. Anna does not cut it with a knife. She tears it. Her hands grip the rounded loaf at its shoulders and pull gently. The crust resists with a faint crackle, then yields. A wisp of steam escapes. The interior is soft and open, full of tender caverns where air and time have done their quiet work. She places pieces onto each trencher, a small one for herself, another for her daughter, Elsbeth, who will soon return from the nearby stream, her hem soaked and her hands cold from gathering watercress. At midday, many tables across the village echo this ritual. In each home, the bread sits at the center, not as luxury, not as ornament, but as necessity. In the cobbler's cottage, a half-loaf is dipped into a bowl of boiled cabbage and barley. At the blacksmith's hearth, slices are laid beside smoked sausage and mustard made from last year's seeds. In the priest's quiet study, bread is eaten alone, beside a candle, with a prayer murmured over each bite. Bread is universal. It connects the butcher, the child, the elder, the monk. It is shared in celebration and in mourning. In times of abundance, it comes gilded with honey. In times of hardship, it arrives alone, but still enough. Anna pauses before her first bite, not from ritual, but reflection. She looks at the steam rising from her trencher, at the careful flecks of bran in the crumb. It is not the first loaf she has made, nor will it be the last. But each loaf, like each day, is singular. It carries its own breath, its own weather, its own history. She tears a piece, spreads it with a smear of cheese, and presses on a sprig of cress. The crunch of crust, the softness of center, the tang of dairy and herb, each element holds its place, none louder than the others. Elsbeth enters quietly, damp hem trailing, hands flushed from cold. Anna nods toward the bench, and the girl sits, eyes scanning the food. No words are needed. They eat in rhythm, the only sound the crackle of crust, the hush of chewing, and the occasional murmur of thanks. Outside, other tables fill. The innkeeper shares his loaf with a traveler from Regensburg, the two nodding over bowls of stew. The weaver's family eats together in their garden, torn bread dipped in lentil mash. The village bell marks the hour, but no one looks up. The rhythm of the table is slower than the rhythm of time. At the manor house, even the lord eats bread. His table may groan with venison and pears preserved in wine, but still the bread is torn, passed, tasted. The cook there, older than most, still feeds her starter each morning as she has for 30 years. Her loaves, too, begin in the same flour from Jacob's mill, though filtered through fine cloth to remove the bran. Bread humbles. It unites. Anna pours a cup of small ale for herself, another for her daughter. The drink is mild, more like hearty water than anything intoxicating. It is brewed by the neighbor down the lane, whose barrels sit just beyond the goat shed. They sip between bites, letting the warmth wash down the meal. When the bread is eaten, the crumbs are brushed gently from the table into a wooden bowl. These are not discarded. They will be added to tomorrow's broth or fed to the hens who cluck softly in the yard. Nothing is wasted. Even the smallest fragment of bread holds weight, deserves purpose. And after the meal, there is stillness. Anna leans back on the bench, eyes closed for just a moment. Elsbeth gathers the bowls. The fire pops quietly, satisfied with its work. The day is not over. There are chores yet. Wool to card, a stew to begin for the evening meal. But this pause, this quiet after bread, is sacred. It is the reward for rising early, for kneading with tired arms, for tending the oven with care. It is the breath between efforts. In this stillness, the village exhales. Bellies are full. Conversations drift from table to field. Children wipe their mouths on sleeves and chase one another in the dust. Dogs curl beneath benches. Cows shuffle in their pens. The day goes on, but slower now, softened by sustenance. And in homes across the valley, empty boards gleam faintly in the light. The smell of bread lingers like memory, like comfort, like home. The sun rises differently on market days. It does not stretch lazily over the hills, but seems to arrive with quiet intention, as if it, too, knows the rhythm of the village and the importance of this weekly rite. In the square, the stones are cool beneath leather soles, and the morning fog still curls along the edges of thatch and timber. Anna rises earlier than usual. The loaves she prepared the night before, carefully baked, cooled, and wrapped in cloth, now rest in baskets by the door. Each one has a small sprig of rosemary tucked into the linen, not for flavor, but for memory. Her mother did the same, and her mother before her. She wears a simple shawl over her shoulders, woven from coarse wool and dyed with walnut husks. Her shoes are worn, the leather darkened by years of walking these very same paths. Elsbeth walks beside her, her fingers wrapped around the handle of a small pail of goat cheese, tucked beneath a strip of cloth to keep it cool. The walk to the market is quiet at first. Other villagers emerge from their homes, their loads swaddled in cloth or nestled in carts. A man leads a small donkey piled with wicker baskets. A boy trails behind his mother, dragging a bucket of dried beans. They nod to each other, not with ceremony, but with familiarity. At the heart of the village, the square comes to life slowly. It is not the frenzied bustle of a city market, but a measured, neighborly hum. Wooden stalls, some permanent, some little more than tables and blankets, line the edges of the square. Beneath a wide linen canopy, the cooper arranges his barrels and bowls. Beside him, a young woman unfurls a length of hand-dyed cloth, its ochre hue catching the light. Anna finds her corner near the old well, where the moss on the stones remains damp well into the afternoon. She lays out her loaves with care, the crusts glistening faintly in the morning sun. Some are round, others long and narrow. A few have been dusted with flour in decorative patterns, fleur-de-lis, a simple cross, even a wheat sheaf traced with a twig before baking. She places the cheeses in a cool, shaded nook and drapes a cloth over them. Then she waits. There is no shouting, no haggling, no hawking. In this village, people know what they want. They come to Anna not because she sells, but because she nourishes. The first to arrive is the smith's apprentice, hands already blackened with soot. He nods, eyes the loaves, and selects one with a thick crust, perfect for dunking in stew. He pays not with coin, but with a small pouch of iron nails wrapped in linen. Anna smiles, accepts it, and offers him a wedge of cheese, which he takes with gratitude. Next comes the widow Greta, her shawl pulled tight despite the sun. She trades 2 skeins of hand-spun wool for a smaller round loaf, and Anna, knowing her age and appetite, adds a sliver of soft rind cheese. Nearby, a group of children crowd around a table where carved wooden toys are sold. A girl clutches a hand puppet shaped like a fox. A boy eyes a wooden top. Their laughter rings out gently, like wind chimes against the quiet morning. There are storytellers here, 2 travelers who bring tales in exchange for food and lodging. One sits cross-legged on a stone bench, spinning a tale about a knight who tricked a dragon with a loaf of enchanted bread. The children listen wide-eyed, crumbs falling from their lips as they chew. Trade ebbs and flows as the morning ripens. A farmer from the next valley brings dried apples and onions in bundles tied with twine. A brewer sells small casks of ale, cloudy and tart. A woman from the woods offers mushrooms, their caps glistening, wrapped in birch bark. Not all trade is fair, but all is honest. If one cannot pay, they promise a service or future goods. A wheel mended, a roof patched, a basket woven when time allows. Anna accepts such promises with a nod. Bread, after all, cannot wait for coin. Hunger does not care for ledgers. Elsbeth wanders off with other children. They chase chickens, play counting games with pebbles, share small tastes of honeycomb given freely by the beekeeper's wife. Their laughter dances through the air, lifting the market's hum to something brighter. By midday, the square is in full rhythm. The sun warms the stone. The scent of herbs, fresh wood, and baking pies mingles with that of earth and linen. Bells ring from the chapel tower, marking the hour. Some vendors pack up, others just begin. Anna eats her midday meal seated on a stool behind her stall, a heel of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a slice of pear given by the orchard boy in thanks. She eats slowly, watching the crowd. There is a peace in seeing others take her bread into their hands, to their homes, into their lives. A woman passes by with a child on her hip. The child reaches toward Anna's loaves, babbling. Anna offers a crust. The child chews it with wonder. A first taste of bread, a beginning. These moments are why Anna comes. Not for trade, not for coin, but for connection. Bread carries the quiet of the mill, the labor of the hands, the heat of the hearth. Now it moves forward again, into soup pots, onto wooden plates, beside stews, with butter, with salt, with joy, with grief. By late afternoon, the loaves are nearly gone. Anna wraps the last one carefully, reserved for the schoolmaster, who cannot leave his post to come to market. She places it in her satchel, beside the pouch of nails, the wool, a bundle of dried thyme, and a beeswax candle she traded for. These, too, are nourishment in their way. The market winds down. Vendors pack their wares. Children are called home. The air cools, and the shadows stretch long over the square. Anna lifts her basket, lighter now, and walks the path home. Elsbeth skips beside her, telling stories she heard, names she learned, sweets she tasted. Their feet move in rhythm with the land, with the day, with the heartbeat of the village. And in homes all across Bavaria, bread is broken, soup is shared, and stories from market day are passed around like warm loaves, torn, tasted, treasured. The year in Bavaria turns not by calendar pages, but by the rhythm of the land, of planting and harvest, of light and dark, of lean times and festivals. And with each turn comes bread, dressed not in its daily simplicity, but in its ceremonial robes. In winter, when the snow lies heavy on thatched roofs and smoke hangs low in the pale sky, the feast of St. Nicholas arrives like a golden flame in the long dark. Children place their boots by the hearth, and in the morning, they find them filled with nuts, apples, and sweet braided breads, hefezov, laced with cinnamon and dried fruit, their golden crusts brushed with milk and egg. Anna wakes earlier still on these days. The dough is richer now, flour mixed not only with water and salt, but with eggs, honey, butter. The scent of clove and orange peel fills her kitchen, and she braids each loaf with care, whispering old blessings with every twist of dough. These are not loaves for sustenance alone. They are for joy. The oven glows hot. Outside, snowflakes cling to the window panes like lace. Inside, the warmth is almost holy. As the sweetbreads rise, their tops darkening to amber, children peek into the kitchen doorway, eyes wide with anticipation. The loaves cool on wooden boards, their crust crackling gently as they settle. Come evening, the entire village gathers in the churchyard for a small procession. Lanterns flicker in the dark. The cold nips at cheeks and fingertips. But inside mittens and coat pockets, hands clutch pieces of still warm bread. The feast is modest, but the spirit is full. Spring arrives not with thunder, but with thaw. The fields open again, and so too do hearts. At Ostern, Easter, bakers shape dough into nests and birds, symbols of rebirth and hope. Anna presses dyed eggs into small rounds of soft bread, each one nestled like a jewel. These are gifts for neighbors, tokens of light returning. She sprinkles the tops with crushed sugar and fresh lemon zest. The loaves are smaller now, playful in shape, and as delicate as the first blooms in her garden. She wraps them in cloth and sets out down the lane, leaving one at each doorstep before sunrise. No knock, no fanfare, just the quiet kindness of bread offered without asking. In summer, as fields swell with grain and the air hums with bees and larks, the Ernefest, harvest festival, takes hold. Now the bread grows grand. Wheat sheaves are bundled in the fields, and loaves are shaped into elaborate forms, plates, reeds, and sometimes even figures, dough women holding sides, roosters with flared tails. These are not meant to last. They will be eaten with roasted meat, thick ale, and laughter that rises like birds into the warm evening air. Anna bakes loaves the size of cartwheels for the communal table, their crust marked with the symbol of the harvest, a sun, a grain stalk, or a simple cross. She adds caraway, rye, even mashed potatoes to some, stretching what the land has offered and giving thanks in every crumb. Feast tables stretch down the length of the village square. Children run barefoot. Musicians play fiddles and flutes. Plates pass from hand to hand. And always, at the center, is bread. Even the animals are fed crusts on feast days. In autumn, when the wind sharpens and the light turns gold, bread becomes solemn once more. All Souls' Day brings remembrance. Anna bakes seelenzopf, soul braids, soft, light loaves meant to honor the departed. Each family places one on the table beside a candle, its flickering light catching the folds of the braid like sunlight on a winding path. Some are left at grave sites, wrapped in cloth and tied with twine. Others are given to travelers, the poor, or those who walk the roads with no home of their own. For the soul, villagers say simply, and the bread, humble and warm, carries that wish. Feasts are not only about abundance. They are about pause, about seeing time in the roundness of a loaf, the stretch of dough, the crack of crust beneath grateful fingers. In every season, the bread changes. In texture, in flavor, in shape, but always, it is more than food. It is offering, celebration, remembrance, hope. It is the village's story, baked anew with each turn of the sun. And Anna, with her quiet hands and deep patience, is the keeper of that story. She does not need to be told what the day requires. The land tells her. The air tells her. The faces of her neighbors tell her. So, as winter once more softens the earth with snow, she sets out her bowls, warms her oven, and begins again. Because in Bavaria, feast or famine, sorrow or joy, the bread must always rise. Night comes slowly to the Bavarian village. It settles not with a bang, but like a shawl drawn gently over weary shoulders. The windows flicker with warm candlelight. The wind, having played all day in the fields and trees, now quiets to a whisper. Inside her cottage, Anna stands before her hearth. The day's baking is done. The oven is cooling, its bricks exhaling the last of their warmth. The loaves, round, golden, some now wrapped in cloth, others cooling on wooden racks, have been delivered or tucked away in the pantry. A few rest on the kitchen table, their crusts gently crackling as they settle, like an old house in slumber. Anna moves more slowly now. The joints in her fingers speak to her in soft aches. She does not mind. Every creak is a conversation with time. She sits beside the hearth, a cup of warm milk in her hands, and watches the coals shift in their bed of ash. The room glows with the gentle color of ember light, soft oranges, deep reds, shadows that dance like memories. Tonight is not for baking. It is for remembering. On the shelf above her sits a small collection of wooden tools. A spoon worn smooth at the handle. A scoring blade with a dull edge. A ceramic bowl with a tiny crack on one side. Each item is unremarkable to the eye. But to Anna, they are stories. That spoon belonged to her mother. She remembers how it would clatter against the rim of a bowl as dough was stirred, how her mother's hands, strong and broad, moved with quiet certainty. No recipe book, no written notes, just instinct, just memory. And before that, the spoon had belonged to her grandmother, passed down hand to hand, from one baker to the next. It is not just tools that are passed on. It is rhythm. It is silence. It is knowing when the dough is ready, not by clock or temperature, but by breath, by feel, by listening. Anna closes her eyes. She remembers kneeling at the edge of the table as a child, chin barely reaching the surface, watching her mother's fingers as they shaped loaves with calm and grace. She remembers how those same fingers wiped flour from her nose with a gentle laugh, then placed a warm heel of bread in her palm after supper. Bread was never just food. It was instruction. It was comfort. It was love, unspoken. And now, Anna passes it forward. Her niece, Clara, visits often. Still young, curious, full of questions. She watches closely, perhaps more closely than she realizes. She stands beside Anna during baking days, mimicking her movements. Her hands are small, eager, unsteady, but they are learning. Clara laughs when flour poofs into the air. She whispers secrets to the dough as it rises. She asks about everything: the salt, the yeast, the shape of the loaves, the way the oven's heat is banked with logs. Anna answers every question, but she knows that the real teaching happens in the doing, in the repetition, in the quiet. Sometimes, Clara braids a loaf too tightly, or forgets to score the top, or places it too close to the fire and burns one edge. Anna never scolds. She simply shows her the next day again and again. This is how the legacy is passed. Slowly, gently, like bread rising. Not every child in the village will become a baker, but each will grow with the memory of fresh loaves on chilly mornings, of sweetened buns during feast days, of the safe, sacred smell of a warm kitchen. And that is enough. The baker's work is not grand. It is not marked by titles or wealth, but it endures. Through famine, through celebration, through winter and war, the oven remains at the heart of the home. Bread is what people return to when the fields lie bare, when the bells toll with grief, when laughter rises after long silence. The baker's legacy is there, in every crust, every crumb, every hand that breaks bread with another. Anna finishes her milk. She rises, moves to the window. The village sleeps now. Only the stars watch, blinking softly above the thatched rooftops. A barn owl glides silently over the trees, hunting in the hush. She turns back to the table and takes one last look at the cooling loaves. Then, carefully, she takes the oldest spoon from the shelf, the one with the worn handle and soft curve, and places it into a cloth bundle with Clara's name stitched on the edge. Not today, perhaps not even this season, but someday, when Clara is ready, it will be hers, and the rhythm will continue. The flour will mix with water, the dough will rise, and the hearth, ever glowing, will remember the hands that came before. Because in the heart of Bavaria, where bread is more than nourishment, the baker's legacy never truly ends. It simply begins again. Evening has deepened into night. The last colors of the day, soft purples, fading blues, the hush of dusk, have vanished into the shadows. Overhead, the sky stretches vast and star-filled, the constellations gently turning in their eternal dance. The moon, a muted silver coin, casts a quiet glow across the sloping roofs of the village. Inside the baker's cottage, only embers remain in the hearth. They pulse faintly in the darkness, breathing out their last warmth like an old dog settling into sleep. The room is cloaked in a hush that is not empty, but full of the day's memory, of the lives lived within these walls, of the calm satisfaction that follows honest labor. Anna has gone to bed. She lies beneath a woolen blanket, its weight comforting, the linen beneath it cool against her skin. The scent of flowers still lingers faintly on her hands, and in the folds of her apron hanging by the door. Her breath is slow and steady, a rhythm as natural as the rising and falling of the wind outside. But the house is not alone. In every quiet corner, a memory rests. The wooden table bears the marks of kneading and shaping, dough once stretched beneath practiced hands. The windowsill, dusted now with moonlight, once held cooling loaves, steaming in the afternoon sun. The bench by the hearth carries the weight of generations, children's feet swinging, stories told, hands warmed after walks in the snow. These are not grand things, but they are real, and in their simplicity, they are enduring. Outside, the village sleeps as one. The streets are empty now, save for a lone cat slipping through the shadows. Lanterns have been extinguished. The blacksmith's forge has cooled. Even the mill, ever humming, has gone still, its wheel resting in the gentle current of the stream. The air is brisk, touched by the coming autumn. Leaves rustle faintly in the trees. The scent of earth, of hay, of cooled stone drifts gently through the village like a lullaby. This is the time for reflection, not spoken aloud, not written down, but felt. In the quiet. In the slow remembering of the day's motions, the lifting of sacks, the stirring of dough, the warmth of the oven, the soft crack of crust as bread is broken. These small acts, repeated through time, are what shape a life. Not fame, not fortune, but rhythm, presence, care. And when morning comes again, as it always will, the hearth will be lit once more. The flour will be gathered. The dough will be mixed, kneaded, shaped, and baked. Because life, here, is not a race forward. It is a circle, ever returning, like the seasons, like the stars, like the baker's hands, rising each day with the sun, to do again what must be done, not for glory, but because it is good, because it matters. And in that slow, steady labor, there is peace. So rest now, dear viewer. Let the warmth of the hearth linger a little longer in your thoughts. Let the scent of baked bread and the sound of turning millstones drift gently through your dreams. You are safe here, in this place where time moves slowly, and where each day ends not with noise, but with quiet satisfaction. The village sleeps, and so may you. And so, the village sleeps. Thank you for joining us on this quiet journey through the rhythms of medieval life. A place where time moved more slowly, and the simplest acts, grinding grain, mixing dough, tending fire, carry deep meaning. If you found peace in this story, we invite you to return anytime. Let the quiet sounds and gentle pace wrap around you again, whenever you need rest. Until next time, may your dreams be warm, your spirit steady, and your path soft beneath your feet. Good night.